and welcome to another one of our videos. Today I'm going to be walking you through how to replace, or rather rebuild, the power steering pump in my W140 Mercedes S320. This is the rebuild kit that is listed as being the correct rebuild kit for the particular part number pump that I have in my car. There were several different pumps. You're going to need to verify which one you have before you order whatever rebuild kit you need. This is not necessarily going to apply to all of them. My particular car is a 1995 model year, just for reference for anybody out there. So this isn't necessarily going to be a video, step-by-step, super in-depth how to do the job, but I'm going to run you through the basic process and give you my thoughts and opinions on how the job goes, how easy or not easy it may end up being. The book time, if I recall correctly, is somewhere around 4 to 8 hours. I can't remember exactly, so it shouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but power steering pump's packed in there decently well, so it's going to be a little bit tricky to get it out and get it rebuilt. So as far as things you're going to need your rebuild kit. You're going to need a whole slew of tools. I don't know what exactly I'm going to need to get the pump out of this car, but I will be certain to let you know. And another thing that I recommend having is a big pan like this to rebuild the pump in, assuming that you're rebuilding instead of replacing. This is going to catch all the fluid and hold it in place as opposed to letting it run all over your workbench, your floor, or whatever. $5 pan at the store, great thing to have. So I'm going to go over to the car, start taking things apart, and then I'll let you know what my first initial steps are to get the pump out. Alright, so at this point I have things started to be pulled apart and I'm ready to pull the fluid out of the pump. What I'm going to do that is use a syringe and just suck the fluid out of the reservoir as much as possible. I have a little extension line that I can stick down in each one of these power steering lines and kind of get as much fluid as I can out of there, just to pull as much as possible out. Once I've done that, the pump's going to be ready to disconnect. I believe there's at least 2 bolts. There's 2 that I can see, and I believe that there might be a third one as well, depending on the type of pump this is. I've watched a couple videos on this, not exactly sure if the procedure is going to be the same for this pump because I haven't found one on this specific part number. So I'm going to pull those bolts loose, see where I'm at, see what's loose, see if there's anything else I need to take off. And just so you know, in order to get to this point, what I did was pulled off the radiator support, the metal piece that goes on the top here. That was 7 10mm bolts, 3 here, 3 on the other side, and 1 in the middle. And then I pulled out the radiator shroud, and I've also pulled off the belt at this point, the serpentine belt. So what I'm going to do is pull the cap off the power steering reservoir, just twist this to loosen it, the cap comes right off, and I'm going to pull the fluid out and start loosening things up, and I'll let you know how that goes. Alright, so as you can see on the screen, I have the power steering pump out, which is awesome. It was actually really easy to take out. I've heard people say that it's a pain in the butt. I've seen reports of people having to remove their water pump, or at least supposedly doing so. Maybe that's true with different configurations of pump, but on the W140 S-Class, on this particular one at least, super easy. There were indeed only 2 bolts holding the pump on. You can see where they were, here and here, going through this mounting bracket. And in the previous clip, I had said that I had taken the serpentine belt off. You shouldn't do that before you remove the pulley. So what you need to do is leave the serpentine belt on, take a 13mm wrench, and use that and a mallet to tap the bolts loose on the power steering pump pulley. Don't remove the pulley before removing the serpentine belt, or removing tension from the serpentine belt. But you're going to need to loosen those bolts with the belt still on, or have a strap wrench or something like that, and a helper along with you to do that. So what I did after the last clip was put the belt back on, knocked those bolts loose, took the belt off again, pulled the pulley off, super easy, wasn't pressed on or anything, it's just held on by those bolts. And then once I had pulled the pulley off, I had perfect access to those front 2 bolts. There's nuts on the back side instead of threaded bosses or anything like that. So you need to be really careful when you're taking those bolts out. Have your hand or a wrench on the backside to get that nut so it doesn't just fall down of the engine bay into the abyss. Once you've gotten those out, those bolts will hold the pump on loosely. You'll feel that it can rock around. And that's the point at which you want to take off your lines. I knocked my lines loose before I had loosened any of the pump, so that's the way that I recommend going about it. It holds the pump more solidly so everything comes apart easier. One of them is 19mm, that's the one that goes to the top inlet on the reservoir. And then one's a 17mm, at least in this case, and that's the one that goes to the steering box. So I knocked those loose. Once I had the pump loose, I took those out. You can see in the shot, I have them bagged up and zip tied, so no fluid goes everywhere. Although, quite frankly, the fluid has already gone everywhere, so there's not a whole lot of benefit in doing that, other than not losing more power steering fluid. And at this point, I'm ready to start cleaning. I'm going to clean as much as I can that I can't get to with degreaser. I'm going to have to degrease this entire general area of the engine bay once I have everything put back together and I can pull the car outside and give it a good wash, because it's completely trashed. The whole under tray underneath the bottom of the car is full of power steering fluid from this leak, and that's what the car parked. I haven't been driving the car for a couple of weeks just because of that. So, I'm going to clean this up, and I'm going to take you over to the bench and kind of talk a little bit about the power steering pump rebuild itself, so the actual rebuild of the pump. Alrighty, at this point you can see I have the pump in the tray, and I have rebuilt it, at least to the point where you see it right here. I'm going to kind of walk you through verbally what I had to do in order to do that. I didn't film it just because there were a lot of little fiddly parts inside. Didn't want to lose them, and quite frankly there's so many different variations of pump that while the concept is the same, the exact process does not carry over from each pump to each pump exactly. So for this particular one, you pull off the reservoir. There's 4 Torx bolts in this. A lot of the pumps have 3, a lot of the pumps have E-Torx. Your flavor may vary. Once you pull that off, you're left with the pump sitting here. You have an O-ring that you get that you replace that sits right there. That's this one. Once you have that taken out, you take these 4 13mm bolts out. You're going to want to set the pump on its end like this and pull the back housing off. And then inside there, you're going to see this seal sitting inside a metal piece. Now this is a 2-piece seal. If I twist this, you can see you have a little brown piece that separates off of the black rubber O-ring. So that's what you're going to see first. You'll pop the old one of those out. Whenever you reinstall, what you'll do is put in the black O-ring and then press the brown plastic. Seems kind of like some sort of Ultem type of plastic, if you're familiar with the aerospace industry and those types of plastics. Feels like something like that. You press that over the outside of that black O-ring when you're reinstalling. Once you've pulled that O-ring out, you have a piece, the piece that goes into. You're going to take a screwdriver or something that won't mar and just kind of pop it loose. It's secured on some dowel pins. It's not screwed into anything. You're just going to pop it loose. And then from that point, you're going to be left with the actual vaned portion of the pump and then its housing that it sits inside. The housing pops off really easily. Again, using a screwdriver, it's secured by dowel pins. That portion is as well. That comes off, and then you are able to remove the vaned portion of the pump. Now, I've been advised in the past to make sure that the vanes don't fall out because they are ground and matched to each slot on that center hub that they sit in. I don't know if that's true or not. I maintained their position and placement whenever I rebuilt this one and pulled that impeller or vaned portion of the pump out and put them back in, all while maintaining their position. I made sure to clean everything thoroughly before I put everything back together. But just a cautionary word, you probably want to keep those matched. Once you've done that, you can pull the shaft out the front and replace the shaft seal. That's as far down as you need to go in order to replace all of the seals within this unit. The shaft seal is a bit of a pain to get out. What I ended up having to do was fixture this down onto a table, bolt it down, and then I just took a flat blade screwdriver and popped the shaft seal out. It came out fairly easily, but you're going to need, if you use a seal puller, a really, really tight ID seal puller in order to pull it out. Once you've done that, you're pressing the new seal using the appropriate size die. Put the shaft back into place. Make sure you lubricate everything with either power steering fluid, or in my case I use Krytox grease because it's inert and won't contaminate power steering fluid. Won't break down over time. Really, really good item for this type of application. Put back in the shaft, put the vaned portion of the pump with all of its little vanes onto the shaft. There's a little circlip that secures that. Forgot to mention that a minute ago. You are going to need some circlip pliers like these that will spread the clip. To uninstall, and to reinstall, I just put it on the end of the shaft and use some pliers to squeeze it into place. Once you've done that, you put the housing back over it with the dowel pins in the proper positions. You put the piece that holds this O-ring on top. Again, once you are into your pump, you'll know what I'm talking about. You put that into place. Then you put all of your seals back into place. Again, cleaning very, very thoroughly as you go through this entire process. And you put the housings back together. When you put the housings back together, you're going to want to put them together in the reverse of the method or way that you took them apart. You're going to want to set this up on its end and set the back housing onto it. Otherwise, everything's going to fall apart because nothing inside here is secured other than the vaned hub being secured to the shaft. So the housings and the vanes themselves can fall out if you were to tip this over. So once you do that, you put your 4 bolts back in, and that's the point that we're at right now. At this point, what I'm going to do is give this a little final clean inside here as well as on the top surface here, because I let this sit overnight. I'm coming back to this the next day. I'm going to give it a final wipe down. I'm going to replace this seal. There's a little tiny seal, which I believe is for this guy right here. I believe it goes underneath it. So I'm going to look into replacing that as well. And after that, the pump is officially rebuilt. So at that point, I'm going to be reinstalling into the car. It's going to be the reverse of disassembly, and I will let you know once I've put it back in the car how everything went, if there were any challenges or holdups, and give you an idea of what the rebuilt pump performs like. Alrighty, as you can see, we have the power steering pump back in the car. Everything's put back together, and we're now outside, so obviously that tells you that everything worked. Everything seems to be going well. Doesn't seem to be leaking. There's maybe a little bit of seepage. I'm not sure if that's going to be seals breaking in or if that's just residual power steering fluid that collected underneath the pump that's kind of seeping out from all the cracks that it was in, because again, this pump was leaking for quite a long time. Overall, it wasn't too bad of a job, just time consuming, nothing terribly difficult about it. In the description of this video, I'm going to have the part number of my pump as well as the part number of the kit that I used for this particular part number pump, just for reference for those of you who have the same setup. So again, not a terrible thing. Maybe 4 to 6 hours is what it took me, including filming. Hopefully this helps you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.